Artyom did not remember his mother's face. In his memory there was neither her voice, nor the scent of her perfume, nor the touch of warm hands. He knew only a dry fact from the documents. She gave birth at 19 and refused him in the maternity hospital. The reason? A difficult life situation. For the shelter staff, it was a routine phrase. For him, it was a life sentence. From birth, the boy had a congenital condition. His right leg was slightly shorter than the left. Doctors said he would be able to walk, but a slight limp would remain forever. For a child, this became not so much a physical problem as a reason for constant mockery. In orphanages, children quickly sense another's weakness, and many use it mercilessly. The boarding school stood in a small industrial town on the outskirts of the region. A gray building with peeling paint, an old yard with rusty swings, and a wooden gazebo. That was the world where Artyom grew up. He learned early to stay silent. If someone pushed him, he got up. If they teased him, he lowered his eyes and endured it. Inside, however, he cherished one simple dream. Someday, everything would change. The old director of the institution was Ivan Sergeyevich, a tall gray-haired man with a gentle voice and attentive eyes. He knew every child by name, often stayed late at work, and personally checked that the kitchen had enough food. Thanks to his efforts, the children received clothes, school supplies, and sometimes even trips to summer camps. He knew how to find sponsors, persuade officials, and literally fight for funding. Ivan Sergeyevich believed that even orphans deserved a decent life. He helped graduates find jobs, secured dormitory rooms for them, and sometimes even gave money from his own pocket. For Artyom, he became the only adult he could truly trust. But the years took their toll. Constant worries, endless visits to government offices, and nervous strain undermined the director's health. He developed heart problems and arthritis twisted his joints. Eventually, he was forced into retirement. For the boarding school, it marked the beginning of a new era. Ivan Sergeyevich was replaced by a new manager, Viktor Pavlovich. He was around 40, wore expensive suits, arrived in a shiny SUV, and from the first day declared he would restore order. His confidence bordered on arrogance. At first, both children and staff were even pleased, young, energetic, modern. But it soon became clear that his idea of order was unusual. Food began disappearing from the kitchen. Portions grew smaller. Fruit vanished entirely. Milk was given every other day, and often already expired. Teachers whispered quietly in the corridors, but were afraid to protest openly. By that time, Artyom had already finished school. Because of his limp, he was not taken into the army, and jobs in the small town were scarce. He decided to remain at the boarding school as a maintenance assistant, repairing furniture, cleaning the grounds, helping in the warehouse. It felt right to stay close to the place that, despite everything, had become his home. He was the first to notice how sharply the budget situation had changed. Sponsors still visited, bringing boxes and transferring money. But only a small portion of that help reached the children.
Viktor Pavlovich behaved confidently.
He had connections, which he often hinted at. Rumor had it he once worked in law enforcement and did not leave voluntarily. Officially, however, everything looked clean. One day, Artyom witnessed a scene that finally opened his eyes. The new director scolded the cook for excessive expenses and demanded the meat purchases be reduced. That same evening, Artyom saw several boxes of food carried out through the service entrance and loaded into the trunk of the director's car. He understood. The problem was not a lack of funds. The money and food were simply disappearing. But the worst came later. A young caregiver named Marina worked at the boarding school. She herself had once grown up there and, after college, returned to help the children. Quiet, kind, with an open smile, she treated the children like family. Artyom had long felt warm feelings toward her, but never dared confess them. Viktor Pavlovich began showing Marina intrusive attention. First compliments, then attempts to hug her or hold her hand. The girl tried to remain polite but distant. One evening, Artyom overheard their conversation in the corridor. The director spoke with clear pressure, hinting that her future job depended on mutual understanding. Marina's voice sounded tense. That was the final straw. Artyom understood that going to the police was pointless. The director had patrons. Any complaint could be buried, and Artyom himself might be fired. So he began looking for another way. For several nights in a row, he read online about journalistic investigations, hidden inspections, and how people exposed corrupt officials. Gradually, one idea turned into a plan. He decided to gather evidence. With savings he had been putting aside for a laptop, Artyom bought a miniature video camera. In the old assembly hall, there was a small storage room for props that almost no one visited. He carefully installed the camera so it captured the table and part of the room. The hardest part remained, making the director talk. Artyom shared the plan with Marina. At first she was frightened. She feared the situation might spiral out of control. But when Artyom told her about the boxes of food and his suspicions, she realized there was no other way. They agreed to act carefully. Marina would invite Viktor Pavlovich for a private conversation in the secluded room. Artyom would stay nearby and intervene if necessary. On Friday evening, everything was ready. Tea, sweets, and a bottle of cognac stood on the table. Marina played the role of an interested woman, and the flattered director quickly relaxed. At first the conversation was empty, but gradually Viktor Pavlovich began boasting. He spoke about how easy it was to distribute the budget, how important it was to share with the right people so inspections would never happen. He mentioned amounts, schemes, and names. Alcohol did its work. He felt like the master of the situation and saw no threat. The camera recorded every word. When the director, completely drunk, finally lost his vigilance, Artyom quietly stopped the recording. The worst was avoided. The situation never escalated into open aggression. Watching the footage, he realized it was enough to cause a scandal. But what should he do next? The police were risky. Local officials, too. So, he decided to contact independent journalists from a regional online publication. A few days later, the recording was published. The town erupted. An inspection from the regional authorities arrived unexpectedly. Documents were examined, warehouses counted, accounts checked. Violations were confirmed. Viktor Pavlovich was suspended, and a criminal case was opened. Employees who had once remained silent began giving testimony. Sponsors demanded reports. For the first time in a long while, the boarding school was in the spotlight, but now not because of scandal, but because of hope for change. For Artyom, it was the first time he felt he was not helpless. Marina looked at him with gratitude and pride. And in his heart, a realization grew. Ahead lay not only a fight for justice, but also personal happiness. After the scandal around the boarding school did not quiet down for several weeks. Regional television channels interviewed officials, journalists published new details, and adoptive parents called anxiously demanding explanations. After Viktor Pavlovich was suspended, the deputy director for academics, Olga Nikolaevna, temporarily took over. She was about 50, had worked there for more than 20 years, and always stayed away from intrigue. Strict but fair, she knew how to find an approach to every child. The investigation lasted almost a month. The commission carefully studied documents, compared reports with real deliveries, and questioned staff. The theft schemes had been carefully designed, inflated estimates, fictitious purchases, and ghost contractors. The sums were significant. When everything was officially confirmed, Viktor Pavlovich was arrested. His former patrons preferred not to interfere. The scandal had become too loud. But for the boarding school, something else mattered more. Life gradually returned to normal. Olga Nikolaevna first restored proper food standards. Fresh vegetables, meat, and dairy products returned to the kitchen. Children who had grown used to empty plates and watery soup could hardly believe it would last. Artyom watched the changes with cautious optimism. He did not expect gratitude or recognition. His name was never mentioned publicly. Journalists protected their source. And that was for the best. Still, many staff members guessed who had played the key role. Some quietly shook his hand. Others looked at him cautiously. Not everyone was ready for such open resistance. Marina became his main support during this difficult time. She seemed to see him differently now. Before, he had seemed like a quiet, reserved guy who simply helped around the place. Now she understood how much determination and inner strength he possessed. One evening they sat on a bench in the courtyard. It was late spring, the air smelled of young leaves, and warm light glowed in the building windows. "You risked a lot," Marina said softly. "If things had gone differently," Artyom shrugged. "I couldn't do otherwise. Watching and staying silent is the worst thing." She gently took his hand. 2 months later, the regional ministry officially appointed Olga Nikolaevna as director. One of her first decisions was to create a supervisory board including community and charity representatives to guarantee transparency. She offered Artyom a new position, head of maintenance. It meant more responsibility and trust. At first he doubted himself, but Olga Nikolaevna said simply, "The most important thing is honesty. The rest we'll learn." Gradually the boarding school began to change. The facade was repainted, old windows replaced, new sports equipment installed. Sponsors, seeing transparent reports, began helping more actively. But the most important changes happened inside the children. The constant anxiety disappeared. They smiled more, organized concerts, and participated in city events. Marina opened a theater club. Watching rehearsals from the hall, Artyom realized he was seeing the boarding school truly alive for the first time. One evening, he invited Marina for a walk along the river embankment. "I used to think life didn't know me much," he finally said. "But you taught me that isn't true." "I love you," he added simply.
She smiled.
"I've been waiting for you to say that." 6 months later, they had a modest wedding right in the boarding school courtyard. The children decorated the yard themselves and prepared performances. Artyom no longer felt like the lonely boy who had once been abandoned. He had a family, meaningful work, and a place where he was valued. Later, they decided to foster a quiet 5-year-old boy who had recently arrived at the institution. Artyom saw himself in the child, confused and searching for warmth. The boarding school continued its life, but now its windows shone not only with electric light, but with human warmth, the light of trust, care, and hope. Artyom sometimes stopped in the courtyard in the evening and looked at the building that once seemed gray and cold. Now it looked different.
He knew the past could not be changed.
But the future could, if one day you stop being afraid and take a step forward. And that step he had already taken.